Within the compensation event process, there's a mechanism which allows the project manager to make assumptions and pass those assumptions down to the contractor to enable him to price or quote his compensation event on the basis of those assumptions, generally where the scope of that compensation event isn't fully definable. And really, I guess, to try and extract some of the risk element out of the pricing of that quotation. In practical terms though, Ian, does that assumption process work?
It can do when it's done properly. Like many things under the contract, it needs to be used in the right way. Certainly, I think it's a very good way of dealing with, as you've already mentioned, the risk that the contractor could allow for in a compensation event. They have the ability to allow risks that have a significant chance of occurring and that are their risks under the contract. And that could increase a compensation event quite substantially. And as it's not reviewed or revised once it's been implemented, the employer may want a way of looking to try and somehow control or reduce that risk liability or allowance. And project manager assumptions are a great way of dealing with that. And also allowing, as you say, uncertainty to be addressed in terms of the scope of the work. So, great tool when used effectively. The danger with it is that you have too many. And you can have almost everything being assumed. So, we assume there's 10 metres of rock. But not only that, we then assume it's going to take 5 guys to dig it out over 2 weeks. And before you know it, when everything's down as an assumption, everything is then subject to, in effect, remeasure or re-evaluation once you know what the actual impact is. And so you don't have any certainty. So it's a great tool, but it needs to be used sparingly.
I suppose going on from that and looking at overdoing assumptions, having too many assumptions, is the project manager, John, really the best person to make those assumptions?
Well, this is the number of times I've got a contractor phoning me up saying, I've made assumptions when I was putting together my quotation. I clearly stated them, put my quotation in, project manager accepted it, and then an assumption's changed and they won't change their mind. And I have to say, well, I can look at it, but I can pretty much tell you what the answer is going to be. You're stuck with that quotation because it wasn't the project manager who made it. I think there really is. I think you have to differentiate, and you and I want to come in this on different assumptions that you make when building up the quotation as a means of seeing a transparency in how that's built up, and they're related assumptions made by the project manager, and that can be, as you say, to quantify risk. It can be that the parties are just they just can't agree what the amount of risk. They agree that there is a risk, but they've just got a different perspective on it. So rather than having an argument about it, take it out as an assumption and price on that basis. And then if it occurs, it's another compensation event. Actually it's the contractor who often makes those or brings them up. But if they are bringing them up and they're crucial to the pricing, have a conversation with the project manager about what do you want me to do about this? Do you want me to price for it? In which case we need a discussion about how much before I submit it, or should I just not price for it?
And that's the key thing, is that only one party can make the assumptions, and the contractor is denied those assumptions. But in practice, we regularly know that they do put forward quotations with assumptions in. But if you literally say, sorry, the contractor can't make any assumptions whatsoever, he's going to stick in a very high protective price. He's going to overprice it. So it's actually in the interests of the project manager and the employer to discuss these assumptions with the contractor. And perhaps I think NEC 4 might be able to sort of make some provision for that.
Yeah, the other thing is that you do have at least 2 other tools within the compensation event procedure to deal with unknowns. One is you extend the timescale for the quotation until we have further information. The other one is to limit the scope of it and just say, well, actually don't price for that aspect, just price for this bit. Yeah. And that might, so change the works information, which involves change design and then construction. Well, the first compensation event is for the change design. Then when we've got a clearer picture about what that change design is, that's the second one. So there are other tools available. You don't just have to rely on assumptions to narrow down, take out uncertainty.
I guess what that really comes down to is just being a little bit more mindful about how you're building up a compensation event in exactly the same way that you would be mindful about how you build up a specification or works information around a project, how you're going to break down an activity schedule. And you should think about your compensation events in very much the same sort of general arena. Would you say that's right?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, compensation is, if it's an option C, it's a mini target cost. If it's an option A, you're either going to affect an existing activity or produce a new activity. So, you should be looking at a similar sort of approach. It should be the contractor's defined cost plus an allowance for risk plus the fee that builds up to that. And therefore that risk element has to be allowed for and included. But assumptions can help deal with that. But as you say, even better, specify exactly what the requirements are, what the work involves. That way you can get a much more accurate price. You don't need assumptions.
So if I summarise that to be, assumptions are a good thing, generally, if used properly and appropriately. But it can be quite a blunt instrument. There might be better ways of achieving the same end without using the assumptions. The assumptions do need to come from the project manager, but they should probably be informed assumptions through dialogue with the contractor at some point engaged in the process of working out how do we specify in the widest possible sense what this compensation event amounts to. And you either split it up into small packages where you can define each piece, or you define some pieces and include assumptions for others. I think that's really where you need to get to in order to utilise that assumptions tool, which I think is quite unique to the NEC form of contract. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.